So I'm going to show you a brief explanation of basic stitching in Blackwork. As I've mentioned, the essence of the art is the run stitch, and that simply means a straight stitch on canvas where you're counting, looking at each thread, or you can go by the holes of the Aida fabric or threads of your even weave linen and just count, let's say 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4 going in, making a simple straight stitch, and then skipping another 4 and continuing on further. Now, you might hear the word Holbein stitch often used in Blackwork. That simply means a double running stitch. So once you do one pass of run stitches in one direction, you're gonna just come back. Hopefully I'm not losing count of my 4 stitches right now, but let's see. So once you have your row of running stitches, you're just gonna come back and fill in that empty gap between each stitch. And in doing so, you're gonna be coming through a hole which already has thread, so just be mindful of that so that you don't tangle up. And essentially what you arrive at the end is a solid line. And so this is great for outlines, and it's used oftentimes in Blackwork. So you'll hear this reference to the Holbein stitch, which is simply a double running stitch leading in a solid line. Now, the nice thing about Blackwork is that it's not so rigid in terms of what to do first or not. The idea is that you just want to find the best way to work to create your pattern and to build depth by not, with keeping in mind the basics of not having a lot of excess thread and knots in the back of your fabric. So we have 2 exercises that I'd like you guys to explore today. The first one is to create thickness and texture by just playing with densities of thread. And you can see an example here in the worksheet and a reference to the size of the thread used in each area. And you can tell how it goes from light to dark as a result of the density of thread. So you should have some kind of embroidery floss, whether it's silk or cotton, that you can separate. And you can choose, to start with just 1 strand and then 3, 5 strands, so on and so forth. Play around and see what works for you. But as you can see here in this example, just repeating that pattern in different strands will allow you to create this feeling of depth and light to dark. I'm going to demo very briefly how you can just use a simple running stitch to explore that. As you can see here, I've got some graph paper as well, and hopefully you have printed out some graph paper. It often helps when you're going with a pattern to kind of draw it out first, just to get an idea of how much you're going to be counting. So in this sense, you can draw out, for example, 2 squares on your graph paper, and you'll know that on your fabric, you're just going to be jumping 2 holes. You'll be doing rows and rows of straight stitches, and then slowly you can start to build a slant stitch in between each of those rows in one direction, as you can see in step 2, and then in the third direction in the other direction, in step 3 in the other direction, so that you arrive at these sort of arrows. And then as you repeat this, you will be able to arrive at this kind of pattern. And again, you can play with thread density as well, and you can even add more shapes to this, which takes us into the second exercise, or building pattern to create tonal shading. So I have 2 examples here that are a bit more challenging. So if you want to jump straight into this, great. If you want to work your way first doing a basic pattern like such, you can do that as well. But these are just octagonal or hexagonal and squares built up to create depth and shading. So going back to this simpler example, just to show you, as you can see here in the beginning, I started off with a row of straight stitches, and then I did 1 row, another row, another row. I'll slowly demo that here. And by the way, when you're working with your needle, we don't do a double threaded needle. We just have one end hanging a little bit loose like that, and you hold the thread and the end of your needle with your fingers. So I'm just going to do a little straight stitch here, You can choose to work vertically or horizontally. Either is fine. I personally find it easier to work vertically. If you want to mark out these rows, if it's easier for your eyes, that's also fine. Once you reach the end of one row, you can count over evenly to the right, if that's the direction you want to go in. In this case, I'm leaving a gap of 4 holes in between my fabric, and I'm just going to go back up in the other direction, creating stitches that are of the same length as I initially did. You want to definitely make sure you're working with good light, as this is tricky on the eyes. So once I've created these rows, I can then imagine you have more running stitches going to the right. I can then start to create in one of these rows my zigs, so my side going in from a hole to a hole, touching one end of one straight stitch to another. And I would just continue this in one direction and then turn around and continue in the opposite direction. And again, this is to create patterns and complexity to basically layering of patterns to create depth, and so on and so forth. So like I said, the nice thing about Blackwork is that it's not so much about rules and regulations and directions and whatnot, but you do want to always make it easy for yourself. So working in one direction and then returning in the other direction, whether it's horizontal or vertical, up and down, is always preferable. Now, in terms of this exercise 1 with this image of sort of lozenges, again, I would recommend that you take your graph paper, draw them out to the size and scale that you want. For example, in this case, I've done it so that I'm going across 2, 4 down, across 2, 4 up, 4 down, across 2, and so on. And I repeat that. And then essentially that's one row. And then I flip that, so like a mirror orientation, and I repeat it again. And as you continue to do that repeat, you'll start to see the pattern build up. You'll arrive at something that looks like this. And again, you can work vertically or horizontally. So go ahead and try those exercises, and I will be in the Zoom room to do a live demo or to answer any questions.